What is going on, race fans, and welcome back to another edition of Research Fantasy Presents our NASCAR DFS picks for the Bass Pro Shops NRA night race at Bristol. Setting up to be a wild affair. This half-mile track is pretty ridiculous to begin with. 500 laps tonight, so getting everything out of the way first. This is a track that can cause some pretty big wrecks. It's not Daytona Talladega like with the speed there, but when you're talking about guys being in such tight patterns going through turns, if someone spins, it can very easily take 5, 6, 7 cars out of the race because the accidents are basically unavoidable. You're just running too close to the competition. This also doesn't favor the leaders as much because lap traffic is very, very real. Again, this isn't a situation like in Michigan where you can just run and run and run and it's hard for cars to get lapped. This is a very, very, very short track. It's very easy to get caught up in lap traffic. Truthfully, the pole sitters have not fared very well in terms of the laps that they've led or their finish for the races because of the fact that it's just much easier to pass. If they're in the wrong position and someone's close enough behind them in second, passing is not as difficult as it can be on some of these bigger tracks. I'm trying to pull up some statistics here. The first position averages leading about 41 to 42 laps in a race, which doesn't bode well for Erik Jones. The highest we saw was 75. The least we saw was 23. But here's the problem. When you're the race leader, you don't get to start first. You get to pick where you start from, but you most certainly do not get to start first. And with a very fast car and Kyle Larson right next to him, it really makes Erik Jones a tough pill to swallow this weekend. It stinks that this is the kind of track and that Kyle Larson is the one directly competing with him to get off to that lead, but it is where we're at. So I clearly don't love Erik Jones this week. I think he makes an intriguing tournament play just because of where he's priced at versus where he's at right now. Could he lead some laps? I think that there is definitely a possibility that he could. He looked solid in practice, finished 5th and 8th, finished 8th in both practices, but I just have some skepticism. Interesting trends. First 15 positions in the last 6 years all have negative place differentials. That's intriguing. The top 5 all average double-digit negative place differentials. The bottom 5 spots, 36 through 40, all average double-digit positive place differential performances. So it's worth noting, taking a look at how we want to apply the logic for selecting picks. I call this a hybrid track, which essentially means that you can combine all the dominator statistics. It's a track where you're not necessarily just looking for place differential because they're driving 500 laps, which means you've got 125 points worth of laps led and 250 points worth of fastest laps. So that's a lot. Even if you divide that up over 5 liters and laps led, that's 25 points added to that person's score. There's probably a fairly decent correlation with fastest laps, so that 25 adds another 50. You can very easily see how it will not be out of the question for several drivers to potentially approach 100 fantasy points this weekend. So I do favor, even though the picks that I made are largely based off of place differential, we'll get into some of the strategy I'm looking at this year at this race. Place differential, as I said, obviously a big thing. We don't really need to discuss that too much. Obviously, guys who can move up through the race. I think your sweet spot is really that 16 to 25 range. those are the guys you really want to look at, because if they can get double-digit place differential, now they're moving into the top 10 or close to it, and your totals are coming close without any laps led or fastest laps to that 40-point mark, which I think is going to just about be the lowest score you can have in your lineup to really take something big down. Qualifying was an absolute mess. I cannot say that I'm more surprised. Let's take a look at some names that are just really shocking to see where they qualified. Brad Keselowski, 17th. Kyle Busch, 18th. Jimmie Johnson, 21st. Kurt Busch, 25th. Kevin Harvick, 29th. Dale Earnhardt Jr., 31st. Dale's not really that much of a surprise. He's been running an absolutely junk car all year, and he just hasn't been able to drive it either. But we've got some names that definitely have some appeal to place differential. I'm not opposed to doing that, especially with a guy like Harvick starting so far back. I understand the car hasn't looked great, but Harvick has an illustrious career here, as does Jimmie Johnson. So, 4 picks that I'm really high on this week. Kyle Busch. So, it's kind of a ridiculous thing to say I'm on the guy that cost the most because, you know, he cost the most, and he's priced that way for a reason. However, I think that people may look at his history at this track and pull away from him. Just so we're clear, here are people that have fared worse than Kyle Busch. Regan Smith, J.J. Yeley, Alex Kennedy, Michael Annett, Josh Wise, Ryan Truex, Timmy Hill, Jeb Burton. Who's fared better? Everyone else. That's right, Kyle Busch has been, in the last 6 races, a dumpster fire. 36th, 8th, 38th, 39th, 35th. Very difficult to figure out how to treat something like this, because you cannot bank on Kyle Busch just getting in an accident, because if he doesn't and he finishes near the top, you're in trouble. I mean, if it's going to be interesting to see where his ownership lands. I'm very, very much of the belief that Busch can navigate to the front, lead laps, and accrue a ton of fantasy points. There's very little that's going to keep me from playing him. I'm not going to spend too much time focusing on how bad he's been here with accidents over the last 6 years, because if he doesn't have an accident, he's going to be a top 5 car. There's absolutely no question about it. He's showing top 5 speed outside of qualifying. A lot of guys in qualifying said when they switched from their race trim to their qualifying trim, they noticed a substantial difference. I'm going to assume that's what happened with Kyle Busch here, and he's going to be a monster to deal with tonight. Another guy I think is going to be Jimmie Johnson, and he's kind of getting lost in the shuffle over the last couple of weeks. He did win at Bristol earlier this year. He's priced at $9,300. He's starting 21st, and kind of as the polar opposite to Kyle Busch, Jimmie Johnson actually is the best driver at Bristol over the last 6 races. 4th, 2nd, 4th, 23rd, 7th, 1st. That's a pretty sterling record there. There's no reason to not look at a guy who's starting where he's at 21st, and not expect him to be able to gain 11 or 12. I'm with Jimmie Johnson the same way I'm with Kyle Busch. I firmly believe that these guys are going to be able to get up to the front of the pack. The potential to lead laps is there. It might not happen on the first 100 laps of the race. This is a 500-lap race. Okay? I'll give up 20% of the race to let these guys get to the front and start leading laps. That's fine. Everyone else can have it. From there, I want to look at Kurt Busch. Last 2 times to Bristol have not been very good visits, but before that, 5th, 15th, 14th, 3rd. I think where he's starting at 25th, I could see this car being a top 10 car this week. His price is favorable. Again, if you're getting 10 to 50 points place differential, you're going to be starting out in a good position where he could end up in the mid-40s without leading any laps or getting any fastest laps, which he's bound to accrue some fastest laps. He's got a good car. Finally, the last guy I really want to look at is Matt DiBendetto. 5,800 on DraftKings, starting 34th. Practices were 32nd and 27th. So not really a stellar showing for him there. But outside of a wreck that he had in 2015, he's finished 21st, 6th, 17th, and 19th. So to think about being able to get someone who can potentially get you 20 points in place differential at that price definitely puts him well up on my list of people I want to talk about. All right, so let's look at Dale Earnhardt Jr. for an example. He's starting 31st. If he gets to 21st, that 10-point place differential just doesn't do enough at his price for his total score to really validate wanting to use him. But DiBendetto starting at 34th, if he's able to get 14 points and get to 20th position, which he's shown he's been able to do 4 out of 5 times at this track, that's an entirely different story. When it comes to value this week, he's going to be somebody I'm looking at very heavily. Doesn't really go very highly owned. And this is definitely based on how qualifying and everything took place. I do think this is a week where you can spread your budget out and not have to focus on spending up at the top for the most expensive guys. So if you want to differentiate a little bit and throw, your Johnsons, that sounded weird. Throw your Johnsons, your Bushes in your lineup and be able to build something solid with those guys, I think DiBendetto makes a really good play. All right, that'll wrap it up. Thanks for listening and watching today. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel below. Check us out at researchfantasy.com. Follow us on Twitter at researchandwin, and join us again next week.